Oh, hello. Welcome to my bar review show. Today we're talking about conflicts. Conflicts involves domicile, choice of law subjects, miscellaneous, and recognition of foreign judgments. We'll forget all that for now. Let's get into it. Domicile involves individual domicile, corporation's domicile, domicile's continuity, and change of domicile. Individual domicile. Individuals can only have one domicile at a time. Domicile by choice, where person is present with intent to remain for an unlimited time. Physical presence, actual physical presence is required. Intent, must demonstrate intent to remain in location. For instance, real estate ownership, voting, tax payments, having bank account, or auto registration. Domicile by law operation occurs when individual does not have legal capacity to choose domicile. Domicile by law operation occurs when individual does not have legal capacity to choose domicile. Infants domiciled where custodial parents are domiciled. Emancipated infant may establish her own domicile. Incompetence, person lacking mental legal capacity to choose domicile, retains her parents' domicile. If person chose domicile while competent, that domicile will continue after person becomes incompetent. Corporation's domicile is always state where corporation is incorporated. Domicile's continuity, presumed to continue until news domicile is acquired. Burden of showing change is on party that asserts it. Change of domicile takes place when person with capacity to change her domicile is physically present in place and intends to make that place home. All right. Conflicts. Now we're talking about choice of law. Choice of law involves limits on choice of law and choice of law approaches. Choice of law is the most important part of conflicts. Limits on choice of law. U.S. Constitution, state and federal statutes, and party agreements can limit courts' power to apply particular choice of law rules. Constitutional limits. Due process. Under 14th Amendment's Due Process Clause, forum state may apply its own law to particular case only if forum state has significant contact or significant aggregation of contacts with state such that choice of its law is neither arbitrary nor fundamentally unfair. Full faith and credit requires forum state to apply another state's law when forum state has no contacts with or interest in controversy. Does not prevent forum state from applying its own law when forum has such contacts or interest in controversy. Does not require forum state to apply another state's law in violation of its own legitimate public policy. Statutory limits, state statutes. State may have statute requiring certain choice of law rules to be applied in a particular case. Federal statutes. Certain federal statutes may preempt state from claiming jurisdiction over certain cases, patent, antitrust, and bankruptcy cases. Party-controlled choice of law. Courts will enforce contractual choice of law provision if it is valid agreement with effective choice of law clause, applicable to lawsuit under contract's terms, reasonably related to lawsuit, not violating any public policy of forum state or another interested state. General choice of law approaches. Vested rights approach, the first restatement. Most significant relationship approach, the second restatement. Government interest approach. Choice of law rules in federal diversity cases. Dépecage, I may be pronouncing that wrong, and renvoi. Choice of law approaches. The vested rights approach, first restatement. Controlling law is law of jurisdiction where parties' rights vested, where act or relationship giving rise to action cause occurred or was created. The forum court would first characterize the issue and action cause. Is it procedure versus substance? Is it a tort? Is it a contract? Is it property? Is it domestic relations, etc.? Most significant relationship approach, the second restatement, applies law of state with most significant relationship to issue in question. Forum court will 1. Isolate precise legal issue that results in conflict between competing states. 2. Identify policy objectives each state's law seeks to achieve with respect to such issue. And 3. Determine each state's interest in view of its policy objectives, concluding which state has a superior connection. Forum court will 1. Isolate issue. 2. Identify policy objectives. 3. Determine interest. 4. Decide superior connection. Government interest approach. Forum state presumably applies its own law, but parties may request another state's law because that state has greater interest in outcome. False conflict. Forum has no interest in litigation. Court applies law of state that does have an interest in the case. True conflict. Forum and another state each have interest in litigation. Forum state. Forum state reviews its own policies to determine which law should apply. If conflict cannot be resolved, then forum state's law is applied. Disinterested forum. Forum non-convenes available. Forum state should dismiss the case. Forum non-convenes not available. Forum state may either make its own determination as to which law is better, or apply law most closely matching its own state law. No state has interest. Forum state's law generally prevails. Extra. Under government interest, states interested in applying their loss-shifting laws, when doing so would benefit state domiciliary. Choice of law rules in federal diversity cases. Federal district courts generally required to apply choice of law rules of state in which it sits, only to extent states' rules are valid under U.S. Constitution full faith and credit and due process clauses. If federal diversity case was transferred from federal court in another state, first state's choice of law rules will be applied. Dépecage. Approach allowing one state's law to govern one or more issues, while other issues are controlled by one or more other states' laws. Renvoi. Requires forum state applying another state's law to apply that forum state's choice of law rules. Generally, it's rejected today. Federal Tort Claims Act requires application of whole law, including choice of law rules, a place where act or omission took place. Extra. Renvoi refers to application of another state's laws, including that state's choice of law rules. Renvoi could result in an endless loop at times. If so, courts must reject. When issues involve property rights and land, courts generally accept renvoi. Break. All right, we're on law subjects. We got torts, contracts, property, inheritance, corporations, family law, and workers' compensation. Torts, vested rights approach, first restatement. Case is governed by law of place where last event necessary to make actor liable for tort took place. Most significant relationship approach, second restatement. Policy principles are applied to determine applicable substantive law. Court considers injury's place where conduct causing injury occurred, domicile, residence, in court place or party's business place, and place where relationship is centered. Default rule. Injury place controls unless another state has more significant relationship to parties or tort. Government interest approach. Forum state generally looks to its own law so long as that state has legitimate interest in applying its own law. Another state's law would be applied if party requests such application and forum court determines other states' law should apply in accordance with forum state's policies. Extra. State interested in applying its own conduct regulating law when conduct occurs within its boundaries. Contracts. Express choice of law provision. Contracts. Contracts. Express choice of law provision. This governs unless, contrary to public policy, no reasonable basis exists for party's choice, or true consent was not given because of fraud, defenses to formation, or interpretation. Vested rights approach, the first restatement. Applicable law depends on either where contract was executed or where contract was to be performed. Execution place. Validity, defenses to formation, interpretation. Performance place. Performance's time and manner, person obligated to perform, and person entitled to performance. Performance's sufficiency and non-performance excuse. Most significant relationship approach, second restatement, generally. Policy factors are considered, as well as location of contracting, negotiation, and performance, place where contract subject matter is located, and location of parties' domiciles, residences, nationalities, incorporation places, and business places. Default rules generally apply unless another state has a more significant relationship with regard to the issue. Land contracts. Law of state of land situs controls. Personalty contracts. Law of state where delivery occurs controls. Life insurance contracts. Law of state of insured's domicile controls. Casualty insurance contracts. Law of state where insured's risk is located controls. Loans. Law of state where repayment is required controls. Suretyship contracts. Law of state governing principal obligation controls. Transport contracts. Covers both persons and goods. State of departures law controls. Government interest approach. Does not change based on substantive areas of law. All right, property. Tangible personal property. Generally, law of state where tangible personal property is physically located applies unless UCC or government interest approach applies. Intangible property. Generally, law of state in which intangible was created or transfer was made applies, unless UCC or government interest approach applies. Real property. Generally, law of state in which real property is located applies, unless government interest applies. Trust property. Trust property transfers, governed by rules above based on property type involved. Trust administration, usually governed by law of place where trust is administered. Inheritance, depends on property type at issue, real or personal. Personal property, testate and intestate succession is governed by law of deceased domicile at death. Real property, intestate and testate succession governed by law of real property situs. Will's validity. Under the UPC, validity is determined under law of place where 1. Will was executed, or 2. Testator's home, domiciled, has abode, or is national at death. Corporations, generally governed by in-corp states law. Family law, marriage. In general, valid where it took place and recognized in all other states. Exception, marriage valid in state where it took place but violates one party's prohibitory rule of domicile will be void in state where marriage would have been prohibited if parties immediately return to that state and become domiciled there. Under vested rights, first restatement, states may recognize incidents of marriage even if marriage is not recognized in that state. Marital interest in movable property generally governed by law of state where couple was domiciled at time property was acquired. Divorce. Law questions related to divorce grounds are controlled by law of plaintiff's domicile. Legitimacy. Governed by law of domicile of parent whose relationship to child is in question. Adoption. Forum court applies its own state law. Workers' compensation. In general, any state with legitimate interest in injury and its consequences may apply its Workers' Comp Act. Employer and employee may contractually agree to apply particular state's law unless doing so would violate public policy of another state with legitimate interest. Recovery in more than one state. When more than one state has legitimate interest, workers should review each state's workers' comp statutes before deciding where to file his claim. Subsequent workers' compensation award in another state is barred only if unmistakable language by state legislature or judiciary exists barring such recovery. Double recovery is not permitted. Immunity, generally only given to employers, not manufacturers of defective equipment. All right, now we're on to miscellaneous. Defenses against foreign laws application. Procedural rather than substantive. Forum's procedural laws as determined by forum states law always govern. Laws against public policy. If foreign law violates forum states' public policy, forum court may refuse to apply that law. Penal laws. Forum state will not enforce another state's penal laws. Proof of foreign law. Generally, most states allow their courts to take judicial notice of other states' laws and federal laws and treat them as law rather than fact. Federal courts must take judicial notice of all states' laws. Recognition of foreign judgments. Full faith and credit judgments. If valid judgment is rendered by court with jurisdiction over parties, parties receive proper notice and have reasonable opportunity to be heard, then judgment will receive same effect in other states as judgment receives in state where it was rendered. Valid judgment. Valid judgment must have been brought in proper jurisdiction, be final, and on merits. Valid judgment must have been brought in proper jurisdiction, be final, and on merits. Defenses. Penal judgments, equitable defenses, inconsistent judgments. Erroneous proceedings are not a defense. Federal court judgments. Fed to state. Federal courts must give full faith and credit to state court judgments. State to Fed. If federal court with diversity jurisdiction over action issues judgment, then state court must give such judgment. Same res judicata effect judgment would have been given by courts of state where federal court was located. Comity. Recognition of judgments from foreign countries. Recognition of judgments from foreign countries. Comity. U.S. courts have discretion to decide whether to recognize foreign countries' judgments. Uniform Foreign Money Judgments Recognition Act covers foreign judgments that grant or deny specific lump money sums, but excludes tax judgments, alimony or child custody judgments, and penal judgments. Recognition of divorce judgments. Divorce decrees from other states are entitled to full faith and credit as long as original state had jurisdiction to issue decree, and decree is valid in original state. Bilateral divorce. If court has personal jurisdiction over both spouses and at least one spouse is domiciled in state, then divorce judgment will be valid and will be entitled to full faith and credit. Ex parte divorce must adhere to subject matter jurisdiction rules, and personal jurisdiction must exist over one spouse. Full faith and credit is not given to other marital agreements such as property rights, alimony, and child custody, but non-domiciled spouse may agree to such judgments. Child custody. Under UCJEA, or UCCJEA, court can make initial custody decision if it is in child's home state, and all other states must give full faith and credit to such decisions. Property and alimony. Bilateral divorce. Full faith and credit is generally given to issues related to property and alimony. Ex parte divorce. Parties must settle these issues in court with personal jurisdiction over both parties. And we're done.